All right, well, good morning and afternoon for everyone across the Central Region. Thank you for attending the GMAT Spring Update webinar. My name is Chuck Reif. I'm a co-lead of the GMAT along with Jerry Widenfolk, and we're going to be presenting some of the activities we have going on our team throughout this quarter, basically, and leading up into the start of the next fiscal year. So let's start right off with our overview of our topics are. We'll start off with the GMAT overview. We'll go into some DAS information and update. A lot's been changing with that program. Look forward to an ESTF update. Then we're going to do another introduction, another presentation of the Model Certainty tool, a real powerful tool that we recently rolled out. Also, we're going to have an update on the Hazard Builder EHWO project, and finally a Forecast Builder update as well. And this will lead to a question and answer and discussion session at the end of the presentation. Okay, just as a reminder, the Central Region Grid Methodology Advisory Team is a joint CR Management NWSEO charter team. It's comprised of forecasters, SUs, and IPOs, and currently 70+% are union members. The initial charter was back in 2008, and we've had a recent update to our charter. But basically, we are chartered, and our responsibility is to survey and analyze grid editing techniques throughout the Central Region. We evaluate and recommend methodologies for techniques, tools, and procedures. And our goal is to promote a cohesive approach to GFE grid editing throughout the region and provide training and support for adopted and endorsed methods from our team. As you might be familiar, we've had several projects that have gone on throughout the years. We basically formed in 2008. We implemented the 4 to 7 day policy and also model blends and grid verification back in 2011. Worked on the original ESTF policy and also worked with DSS updates to those grids in 2013 and 14. Might remember the QPF WPC experiment we performed in year 2015, 2016 as part of one NWS forecast. And basically one of the culminations of what we've been working on was the Forecast Builder project. And essentially that's now a period 2 to 14 policy, and helps standardize GFE methodology throughout the region. And we've been working with that and expanding that across not just the region, but now trying to work to expand that beyond into other regions and really have it as one of the main ways that other NWS offices can interact with GFE and the grids. This all leads to eventually going to what we hope to be the MBM as our common starting point, and also integrating a DAS. So as part of the timelines, you can see we're headed toward MBM and full implementation of DAS, which a lot of that is underway. Just as a reminder, as part of the Central Region roadmap, we are down in the bottom right corner, the Central Region Grid Methodology Advisory Team, also known as the Forecast Evolution Team. And some slides from the roadmap presentation. What we are working on right now, it would be the Digital Aviation Services, ESTF 2.0, and a move to the MBM as a common starting point to the forecast. Additionally, a Forecast Builder looks to be enhanced with Fire Weather Incorporation, Auto Updater for all the interrelated grids within GFE, and a continued science-driven evolution. And there'll be more about Forecast Builder later on. And specifically about Forecast Builder, essentially that has sprung from the GMAT team, and now is really large enough that it has to stand on its own with its own presentations, its own webinars, and allowed to really focus on that, especially now that we're trying to incorporate more locations outside of Central Region and really sell it as a solution for nationally editing and working in GFE. Currently, our 2018 team members are on this page. You can see myself and Jerry are co-leads, and we have a mix of SUs and ITOs, and Andy Juff's up at headquarters recently moved there as our Forecast Builder developer, working with us closely as well. And also point out that David Bargerbrook is a consultant mountain forecaster helping us out with any mountain issues that we have there out of Boulder. If you do have any questions, any interaction with any of the members of the team, feel free to bring any questions, any suggestions, or new ideas to them as well, and we'll get them into our discussions. We have calls every other week, and we basically bring up topics that might be issues that would concern this team and help to advance some of the projects we're working on. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and let Marcia take over and start a digital aviation services update.
All right, thanks, Chuck. Welcome, everyone. As you know, we had a pretty major upgrade with the last tech note to digital aviation. And so if you haven't taken a look at it in your office yet, please do so as soon as you can. And if you are one of the offices, and there's about 50% of Central Region offices that are already using digital aviation services routinely, thank you. And we look forward to your feedback as we move forward and in getting all of Central Region going with digital aviation services. All right, so the tech note was released in late March, early April, and with that tech note came a new Taff Formatter. It's called Taff EXP in your GFE. There's also a Taff version. That's the regular older version that you've been familiar with and able to use. I'll go on into more on that new Taff Formatter on the next slide or two. We also had upgrades to the Aviation Populate and Aviation Finalize tools. And so what they are now are the national versions. And Aviation Populate actually didn't change, but Aviation Finalize did change quite a bit, and there is training available for that. We also have a few new tools available, but those tools might not look very new to you guys who've already been doing DAS in your offices, because the national tools were designed very closely by Central Region people. So again, that's in the training. Forecast Builder. You may have noticed a slightly different look in there. It's now in the operational aviation mode, meaning when you go to run Forecast Builder, it should have the TAF time in it, the nearest upcoming TAF, as one of the options to select. And if you do select the TAF time, then it will, on step 2, automatically have checkmarked your aviation grids to populate that. All right, more on that in the next couple slides. So what's going on with the tech note is this part didn't change. Your aviation grids, if you're not an office that's regularly using aviation yet, DAS yet, then your aviation grids are still automatically populated in the background. Now, if your office is starting to experiment more with DAS or you're considered operational, then you need to reconfigure this. You got to rerun this. Your ITO or your whoever does techno can do this, and that way your aviation grids won't get overridden every 6 hours unless you let that happen with the banner. All right, Central Region, we're going to all go operational by July 1st. And I say by July 1st. I encourage you to do this sooner rather than later. Jump right in and get started, and that will only be beneficial to your office. And if you haven't jumped in as an office to do DAS, make a plan. Aviation Focal Points or your SU, make a plan as an office to switch. If you have any questions along the way, I can help you, definitely. All right, so as you know, training was released, the national training for DAS. And I had done a webinar and a different job sheet training a few months ago. So all of that is combined together into a Central Region DAS curriculum. And so that should have been assigned to your training so far. Just a reminder, at the end of Module 2 for the National Digital Aviation Services GFE Grids module, there's a job sheet, like Aviation Finalized Description, where I'm giving a video in that. You can actually skip over that in the national training because it's separated for Central Region as item number 5 on the screen here as the Aviation Finalized job sheet. So you don't really need to take it twice, but I have a version that's more geared towards central region. So that's what you would need to watch. All right, we'll just move on to the next slide here. All right, so ever since 17.2.1 has been getting installed as an AWIPS build into people's offices, we've noticed some little discrepancies with how to get your Taff Formatter output put into Avian FPS. Now, you can always do a simple copy from the Taff Formatter and paste it into Avian FPS. But a lot of people like to go into Avian FPS and do the file restore from method. So let's say you haven't done 17.2.1 yet, then your process is going to be opposite of what I show here. Sorry for that. So moving forward, if you're on AWIPS build 17.2.1 or higher, and this is because some file permissions changed in that build, then I'm going to give you some quick instructions on this. And these are just screen captures, and they're going to pop up one at a time. So I'll just breeze through this. It's a recorded call. You can go back if you have trouble. All right, let's go ahead, Chuck. All right, so you're in Avian FPS, and the next picture will show you clicking on the File menu at the top left and clicking Restore From. And so then what pops up is a window. And notice at the top it says, for me, it says mcrons, cave data, etc., site, MKX, aviation, temp folder. Well, that's a new file version. And so if you click on gridtaff.txt, then that will pull up what was last run for Taff EXP, for that Taff formatter. Now let's say you wanted to pull up the Taff and not Taff EXP. So let's pause here for a second. Remember that in GFE, you need to run either Taff or Taff EXP after you finalize your grids, after your aviation grids are the way you like them. So then you go over to Avian FPS, and this is where you're pulling in what you just ran. Okay, go ahead, Chuck. All right, so what we need to do, just a one-time thing per user, is set a new bookmark if you want to pull in just the regular Taff formatter. And so you, on the left-hand side, you click on File System, and then you see on the right, I selected Local Apps. You want to double-click on Local Apps, and then you find Data, and you double-click on Data, and then you just single-click on Products just to select it, and then you go on the bottom left, and there's a plus sign. That's how you add a bookmark into this Places folder or center. So go ahead and click plus. And so you see the Products folder appears on the bottom. And when you click on Products, then you see that in that folder is the gridtaff.txt, and that's your regular Taff formatter that's available there. So that Products folder that you bookmarked on the left-hand side, that'll always be there now under your username. So this will be really quick the next time you do this. And then you'd click OK, and it goes back to Avian FPS, and it pulled in that Taff from the Taff formatter. Now remember, you would delete that top header line, and then you'd select which type of Taff you're sending. Was it routine or amendment? Because Avian FPS only remembers the last thing you did in it. It doesn't automatically select what is necessary. Okay, so that's all I have for that. Moving on to the Taff formatter. As I said before, you have two versions available in your GFE. So the new Taff, which is called Taff EXP, when it pops up, you get this little GUI, and it looks different than what your old Taff formatter looked like, and there's a detail level slider bar. That slider bar is not active yet. It had to be created because that's a future a future build for it. Actually, the next build will have that detail level activated. The developer at GSD is refining the wind rules and removing some averaging that we had put in. But overall, the Taff EXP, it actually performs okay in busy weather, but it's the really quiet weather that some of the bugs show up, like with the wind direction and stuff like that. So that's getting fixed and tested right now. I know the MKX office has an updated version, and we're looking through it and sending more feedback to the developer. So that will be sent, the new version tested will be sent out in a month or two, so that everybody in Central Region is onto an upgraded version. And then maybe a month or two later, we'll send you out another version of Taff EXP. And this is going to go on until we think Taff EXP is ready. All right? And so as you know, not everything comes out exactly perfect right away. And that's because we've tried to test it, but we don't get every scenario. And so now, as you guys are going through and testing it, just know that you're finding new scenarios that just haven't been gone through yet. So I appreciate any feedback you guys can give. And on VLab, which I'll get into in a second, there will be ways of posting feedback. All right, let's move forward. All right, so now there's a question that comes up pretty often. We've got the national version of doing DAS, and we have the Forecast Builder version of doing DAS. Which are we supposed to be doing? All right, the answer is both. Both are totally acceptable. And what happened is the national version was getting developed, way before Forecast Builder came along. Well, anyway, the national version just got ready to send out to everyone nationally, right at the same time as Forecast Builder is now capable of doing digital aviation. So we do have two different methods, but they can work hand in hand. And so the training that's in the Commerce Learning Center does explain how to use Forecast Builder and the national tools together. But I'm going to review a little bit here really quick because there's been some confusion. Now, which one is Central Region going to go toward? We're probably going to lean toward Forecast Builder ultimately, because Forecast Builder will have a more emphasis in the ESTF time period coming up in the future. And the thing is, we can use those national tools within Forecast Builder. The idea is you really need to know the tools, know every bit about those national tools, especially Aviation Finalized, know the ins and outs of them, so that you know when they're going to work better and when you might need some additional tools above and beyond what Forecast Builder can do. So let's say you're running Forecast Builder for a TAF time period. It's going to populate your aviation grids in step 2. Well, if you hadn't been running Forecast Builder, you could have run Aviation Populate to make those grids, right? The point is, Forecast Builder can put the grids in there for you, but you might still want to open Aviation Populate because it turns into a quote-unquote aviation edit tool instead of Aviation Populate. Remember that there's that whole bottom section of Aviation Populate that can populate cloud-based secondary grids, or you can select small areas and populate other types of grids. So it's definitely turns into a useful editing tool. Then what you do is you finish going through Forecast Builder, and Forecast Builder will now finalize your aviation grids for you. Remember that when you get to the non-precip type step, you would populate fog grids using your visibility. There's also QC checks built into Forecast Builder, so that might actually affect your visibility grids. But the point is, if you know what all the tools are doing from your training, you're going to understand the process, and it's going to make sense. Also practice. Practice makes perfect. And so then you let Forecast Builder do its work, and if you still find a need for some of those outside of the box tools from Aviation Finalize, you can just run that after Forecast Builder. The reason why we don't have Forecast Builder and DAS completely the same is because some of the Forecast Builder or some of the Aviation Finalize tools were created and developed and thought of by offices outside of Central Region. And some of those ideas kind of go against what Central Region talks about for common starting point and consistency with meteorology. So that's why they're not going to be totally the same in the very end. The point is both processes can create pot fog grids, and that's a huge breakthrough, and so they can work hand in hand now. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so what are the differences? What are the similarities? On the right is where, when you open up Aviation Finalize, the national tool, see the default check marks, pop adjust cloud base, QC viz with pop and weather, and adjust wind gust using wind. Those are all the settings that are put into Forecast Builder. And then click one more time. If we check mark the viz adds new weather, part of this functionality is also built into Forecast Builder. You know, when you get to your non-precip type and make pot fog grids, the pot fog from visibility slider bars pop up now. The thing that's not in there is the dew point depression check. And I've talked with Andy, and I think we're going to be working toward merging those two functions together. And haze and smoke, you can also make pot haze and pot smoke. They're just going to get developed to mimic each other a little bit better. All right, next bullet point on this, but same slide. The Aviation Finalize, there is currently a little freezing fog bug in that it doesn't recognize it as a precip type. That was just an overlook, and that'll be fixed in the next tech note. And then what's in Forecast Builder, but not Aviation Finalize, is this. You see the bullet points in the middle of the screen. And this is quite a big change, so I don't want you guys to be surprised, but it's in here. So wherever you have low visibility, so less than a half mile, it will make sure your sky percentage is set to 90% or greater. And then wherever you have pot fog or freezing fog set as patchy or higher, then it's going to go ahead and set your visibility down to 6 if you have higher visibility. So those are just some QC checks that were built into Forecast Builder. They didn't get into Aviation Finalize because that was kind of like a later thought in the development process. All right, and then verification. In one of the training modules that was recorded before, the training or the verification web page actually changed since then. It's moved over to VLab, and so this is the web address to access your verification, including aviation verification for digital. And I have two addresses for VLab. There's the public version that has web in its address for VLab, and then there's the private version that has group in the address. If you go into the group one, you need to request access, but that's the only way you can post to forums. And so the forums in VLab are the way to ask questions and make suggestions and send me your complaints. You can also send them to GMAT web or email address, and you can send it to marcia.krantz@noaa.gov. And we take your feedback. This is a development period. We want you to feel comfortable with DAS, and if you need some help getting to that comfort point, please let me know. I'm here to help. So that's all I have about DAS, and I know we'll have time for questions at the end of the talk.
Okay, Jeremy, you ready to go with ESTF?
Yes, I am. Thanks, everyone, for coming on the call. My name is Jeremy Martin. I am the SU over in Goodland. One of my areas I'm going to be looking at is ways to kind of improve the ESTF process we already have going across Central Region. This first slide I have, I know it's ESTF is listed as ESTF version 2, but we're really trying to revitalize the whole process. It seems like maybe it's lost some steam. Maybe it's not being followed as closely as it used to be. Maybe there were some things going on that we weren't aware of that have hindered us. And one of the difficult things as I really started drawing out this project and figuring out what we need to look on is that there's so many things that actually go into the ESTF process. It's not just a one solution kind of thing. We have verification issues. We have grid strategies, documenting things, how to monitor the grids, collaboration issues, potentially new gridded fields. How do you manage all these modifications? Because in the near term, that's probably the most prone time we'll be making most of our modifications is in the near term. But how do you manage all of that when there's constantly new data coming in? There's a lot of individual processes going on here, and as opposed to trying to come up with one blanket thing that was going to catch all these, we decided we're going to try to work on this in more of a modular kind of aspect, where we'll pick a couple things up first, see if we can shore them up, and then work on new things as it goes on. So the hope is you're going to see several iterations of the ESTF in the coming year here, where we fix what we can fix easily, and then we keep working to improve and iterate on it until we come to a final end state that it works for everybody out on the operations floor. Next slide. And I wasn't the best PowerPoint maker last night, so you're going to have a lot of walls of text here. So my apologies ahead of time. I want to talk about new gridded fields. They've already mentioned this earlier in the call, but we want to incorporate all these other grids into the ESTF, because right now it almost seems to be strictly a public field. So we want the DAS to be part of the ESTF. We want marine grids, if you create marine grids, to be part of that. And fire weather, which is often kind of a field that gets sometimes forgotten about when it gets busy. We want to see all these grids be incorporated into the same process, going through the same workflow. So basically all this goes to the forecast builder, where if we make one update, it's going to be smart enough to go figure out what else needs to be updated and update that for us. Something we'd really like to investigate and test out, and I know it's going to be a bit of a change and probably going to need a lot of testing, is things like 1 hour QPF and 1 hour snow. The more and more we hear from our partners is they want to know when these big impacts are coming, and if we give them any specific guidance. We think having these grids available might help do that, might help us message a little bit better. And although I know that's a big change from how we do things, so it's not going to be something we're just going to throw at everybody. We're going to do a lot of investigating and testing, and like I said, iteration is a big thing with me. I like to try things out and then get the feedback where they don't work, and then try to improve on that. As far as assessing the current state of the STF, we did release a survey a couple weeks ago. There's a link to it on our VLab page. I could probably send another reminder out to everybody if they want to see it. I'm really hoping to get some open and honest feedback on the process here. I'm really hoping to find areas where it really worked well. I've heard some positive feedback in the past, so we have some good tools out there. And I really want to know where there's areas where the STF has failed. It made the whole job harder than it had to be. It hindered operations because we were spending more time editing these grids and actually getting our message out. And I also want to know what everyone, I'm not an operational forecaster that much anymore. I work shifts here and there, but it's not a day-to-day thing like I used to be. I really want to know what the person sitting on the desk every day needs to accomplish all these goals we're giving them. I mean, if you had a perfect world, what would you have in front of you to make this work? That's the kind of information I really want to know right now, and then we can work on building that into the process in the future. Next slide. On the verification and documentation side, we have a lot of verification now. We have the short-term boys short stuff. We'll look to probably improve that, make that a little more usable in the future. But one thing I really want to get into on the verification side is more documentation things, and I really want to flex VLab to do this. I want people to have a place where they can post times where look where this methodology kind of failed. Find areas where it really worked well, and really document cases where maybe things didn't go as smoothly as they possibly could. An example right now I can think of on top of my head is when we have extreme wind events. I think all of us know in the higher plains know some of our NITs are kind of struggling with those for various reasons. That we need to know we need to find good ways to work with that, so we're all on the same page when one of these events kind of come, so we're not speaking different languages to each other about grid editing. A really important thing too is also we have a place that we can document things for the MBM developers. I know at some point we would like to kind of hand off the production of blended grids to them, and I can speak as someone who works on computer code a lot. If you don't tell us something, if they don't tell them something's broken, they're probably not going to realize it's broken until someone talks to them. So this is going to be a nice place where we can have those kind of things noted, and also the GMAT can provide support to everyone to help them actually document these cases. You know, pull the data back out and see what's actually in there. And finally, a thing I'd like to have on a documentation kind of site is how-to type cases. You know, I often get that quite often. Well, how do you do that? How do you put this cold pool that wasn't expected into the forecast, and how do you move it through the forecast? I really want to have a place where operational forecasters can kind of, I don't know, create their own little blogs explaining how they'd go about it and showing examples. On the grid methodology side, this is probably more of what you're used to seeing from us. One thing we want to look at is kind of have a standardized init time in the near term to support DAS. Like I said, this is all tied together. We want the DAS to be just as part of the ESTF as anything else. And since those Taff times have a set time, we're going to need to have some inits that at least try to mirror that to some degree. I want to really flex the model certainty tool, which you'll be hearing about shortly, to help us find these targets of opportunities, and also to help us make database grid edits. You know, we're not just adding values, we're not just adding 5 to everywhere, we're letting the data distribution help us move to the final solution. There's something called, I believe now it's called forecast build or edit retention. I keep getting the name wrong, so I didn't put the name on here. There's different techniques out there that will actually let us maintain some important changes, even though after we do an init. We're going to look at ways to include that in the near term, because if we don't have that, I think that's going to make things a lot more difficult. As many of you may or may not notice, the Go16 data doesn't work in our ESTF tools right now. We really want to fix that, and we're kind of waiting for an AWIPS build. I believe it's coming late summer. Don't hold me to that number. They'll let GFE use that data, and then once that's there, we will make sure all our tools are updated. There's been kind of an area where it's funny because no two forecasters have the same answer on this about where you can actually, when it comes to POPs, when can you be deterministic and where do you have to be probabilistic? I think we all have some ideas, but we're really going to work out some guidance to help everyone get on the same field on this, and that's going to need a lot of forecaster input as well. One of the hardest things I've had I remember this from my time forecasting was, what do you do in the ESTF time period, like the first 6 hours or first 3 hours really, when nothing you have is actually capturing the fields right? And that's usually a convective thing, you know. Weekly force days, you get a bunch of cold pools flying around, the winds are crazy. We need to have some common way to how we're going to approach those when you can't necessarily trust any of the short-term models on those near-term features. And that kind of goes right into the whole 0-hour forecast thing. We say a lot of time we want the 0-hour forecast to be representative, because that's where people see that if it's not accurate at the beginning, they're not going to trust it later out. And I think one of the big problems now is that previous bullet point is there's situations where, for whatever reason, the atmosphere isn't quite behaving like we thought it would. Next slide. And I want to reiterate this, that we want to take the approach to the STF to be iterative, where we try some things, see how they work, try some more things, see how they work. So we're not really planning one big, here's a new document, this is how you have to follow it now. We're going to do this in phases. We don't necessarily have all the individual components of each phase decided right now. That's why I'm using these broad phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I just want to assure everyone that we're not going to throw this out in bulk. It's not going to be one big, now you have to change everything. We're going to pick our targets and implement what we can when we can, and make sure everything's working before we move on to the next implementation. And really our goal here is to design a process that, oops, you threw me off there, you caught me reading from the slide. Design a process that allows everyone to be meteorologists in the near term. And I want everyone to be spending their time analyzing data, understanding what's going on, be able to form good messages to our partners. And I want them to be able to get their thoughts into the grids as needed, and I want to make that as easy as possible. It shouldn't be I always feel like that's kind of the part where the process breaks down, is that part shouldn't be the hardest part of determining a forecast. That the analysis should be the challenging part, not the actual getting this into the grids. So that's kind of our goal, and that vision and goal is what we have in mind when we're implementing these things. Is I'm not going to do things to make things. We're not going to do things just to make things hard on people. We're going to try and make this whole process as easy as it can be, so you can focus back on the meteorology and not worry so much on the grid management side. And with that, that's I think my covering of the ESTF right now.
All right. Well, thanks, Jeremy. We'll go on to model certainty with Jerry.
Hi, can you hear me?
I got you, Jerry.
You can hear me? Okay, my phone was saying for some reason it was muted, so I apologize for that. So the model certainty tool, it has gone through a pretty massive upgrade. There was an initial version that was sent out to everybody probably about 6 to 12 months ago, somewhere in that time frame. This new version really adds a lot of functionality to it. The whole idea with model certainty tool is really to provide a lot of statistical information to the forecaster that is available in GFE. So it's going to use all the model data that we have in GFE, and it can use this model to provide the targeted grid edits that we've been looking for. So we've been trying to come up with a tool, basically a tool that will find all of these appropriate places where we should be making edits. And we can do that sometimes by looking at uncertainty. And so this is one of those tools. It can also be used, we use a lot here in Milwaukee for situational awareness as well as for DSX activities. There's a new sort of element in here called percentage grids, and you can even generate like percentage grids based on a certain threshold. Like if you're concerned that it's going to get below 32 degrees on a night, it'll give you the probability of that occurring. So some of the new elements in here, we have wind direction, storm total grids. We used to have snow amount grids that you could do an accumulation. Now it's a little bit better named as a storm total snow or QPF or ice. Cloud-based primary visibility for DAS type initiatives, max wind gust, wind chill, heat index for different watch warning products. There's also box and whisker plots, windrows. There's the probability grids, as I had mentioned, and also in here some warm tail and cool tail information based on the distribution. So it's going to look at all the model distribution and give you an idea of which way the grids are leaning, whether you're leaning to the right side or left side of the distribution. So the next slide. So in here, I'm just going to quick show an example of storm total snow. I'm choosing to show all of the individual models, and I don't have any of the BC models selected. One way you can do this in GFE is if you use the Control and Shift buttons to highlight and deselect the models. It's a real quick way to do it. So let's go to the next one. So here you can see all of the statistics that model certainty will throw at you. You have the 10, 50, and 90th percentiles. That should look familiar based on the probability of snow experiment that we've been working on. You also get your average in all the individual models, min and max grids. Those are based off of what all of the models are saying at every grid point. So it's a true min and max. You also get the standard deviation, skew, and that's for this particular one. So let's go to the next. So here's an example of the box plots. So in this situation, I turned on max T, and I also turned on the box plot. And what you can do is you can run it for individual edit area that you've selected, or if you don't select any edit area, it will default to your CWA's edit area. So some of the information over here on the left, if you have the black star in there is the official forecast, so that's what you're actually saying. The red line is the median, and the black line is the mean. You also have the 90th and 10th percentiles. The box is the 25th and 75th percentile. Any point that falls outside of the 90th or 10th percentile will be a green diamond. And that sort of that variation you see in the dots and the X coordinate, that is basically put in for visual appearance. It doesn't really mean anything. If you didn't have that, it would just be one line and sort of lose track of where all of the models fell. Some of the things I'm going to be adding to this in the future is the ability to roll over. Right now, it'll just sort of give you the point and the value. My hope is to be able to roll over, and it will give you the model information so you can see which model is which. And here's an example of the wind rows for wind direction. This can be very useful for things like lake breezes. It can also be useful for pointing out how the low pressure system is. If every model has it distributed differently, this will basically show you a light pink graph as all the models are going to have different wind directions for that point. So this is one of the very first things I looked at, because something I frequently got with the blends was what happens when the blends are basically depicting the wind direction or the low in a bunch of different places. And this shows you exactly that. So this would show you an opportunity to make a targeted edit. So if all of the low pressure system, it's going to be up to you to choose which model that you want. So let's go to the next one. So in this one, I'm going to show you an example of how to create the percentage grid. So I've selected Min-T, and I've turned on the percentage grids. I've turned off the individual models. And when you hit the Run button, you'll get another GUI to pop up. And this is where you get to choose the threshold that you're interested in. So in this particular case, I've chosen a threshold of 32 degrees, hoping that we can actually warm up here in Wisconsin. So if you go to the next slide, it will show you in the Grid Manager what all is here. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, a difference here in the Grid Manager is prior to this release of model certainty, it would add all of these temporary grids below your non-temporary grids, so they'd all end up sort of intermingled, and it got to be messy. So in this situation, I've actually removed all of those grids, and it creates a much easier way to see the information. Another thing I wanted to point out is that standard deviation grid, it's highlighted red. And this gets highlighted red whenever there's grid points that exceed 2 standard deviations. So this is another way of seeing, when you're looking at a period, what periods there might be a higher level of uncertainty. And so you might want to zero into that period and take a look to see what the models are saying. So the other thing here is the percentage grid. So the way it's going to come out, it's going to say Min-T prob LE for less than or equal to, and then your threshold. If you hit enter, we can actually look at that. Or go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So here's the representation of that. And the way this is computed is actually looking through the entire CDF. So the 0th percentile to the 100th percentile. And I look to see when the threshold is actually met, which percentile it is met for each grid point. So it's a true probabilistic grid. It's not like the SREF where it's counting up the amount of elements or amount of models that are forecasting that threshold. This is actually looking at the CDF. And I think that might be it. Yep. So now we're going to move on to Eric with the hazard builder, and take it away, Eric.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go start like Jerry said. My name is Eric White. I'm a forecaster at the Springfield office. I'm going to quickly cover a couple changes that have occurred with Hazard Builder in the last build, and a couple things we're going to be working on in the future build. The first thing that we've changed is the Hazard Builder grids are now only saved in GFE if there's a risk level greater than none, or a color greater than green. So you have to have a limited yellow, red, or purple to be saved now. So if you're in GFE in saved mode, you may see a lot of old grids. This is why they're still being calculated, just not being saved unless there's a risk level in there. This is to minimize the ISC traffic, so we don't want to send all the grids there and overwhelm it. We are currently not sending the Hazard Builder grids to ISC, but we are looking to add that in the future. And by making this change, we think we'll be able to without having any impacts on ISC. But to be sure, we're going to have a couple test bids, test sending the Hazard Builder grids to ISC to make sure there's no impacts on it. But if, again, we're not anticipating any because of this change. And then if there's not, we'll we'll look forward to moving towards all offices in Central Region sending hazard build grids to ISC, hopefully later this summer. And the benefits of this will allow surrounding offices to see each other's risk levels. This could help coordinate headlines and office level tempo. And also, we've gotten some feedback from state level emergency management that they'd like to have a state level EHWO. So by having these grids in ISC, one office could create a state level EHWO potentially in the future and display the risk levels for each office as using ISC grid, so their actual risk, because the forecast database may not have the same risk level as the neighboring office as well. So using ISC grids could give us the potential of doing this in the future. To move on to the next slide. Another change we made in the last build is we updated the fire weather thresholds, which now hopefully better match different sub-regions of Central Region, because before they were all based on sprinkler thresholds, but now we've set them up for the mountains, plains, and over in this region, so they all should match up a lot better now. And the next, and some things we're looking for future builds is we're looking at ways to incorporate the heat risk, which I think Western Region's working on, and the hazard builder EHWO. I think this will be really big for the mountain offices, but I think could potentially impact for all offices in Central Region, but that's something we're looking at in the future. And we also plan on creating grids for the frost freeze flag and the fire weather brown green flag, because right now we just have a flag that's all or nothing. Your whole CBA it has the flag turned on or not, but we've gotten some feedback that there's times that maybe the northern part of somebody's CWA hasn't started budding yet, so there's no frost risk up there, but the southern has. So by creating grids will allow us to set it up where there could be portions of the CWA that you could have the flag set and other portions not. So that's something we're looking at in the future build. And the Central Region GMAT team is also working with the Central Region IDSS team, and the Central Region IDSS team is planning on to releasing some more information on the use of the hazard builder operations and the rollout of EHWO for the entire region here in the coming weeks. So you can watch for that. And that's all I have.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Everybody, this is Andrew Just here at the Central Region headquarters talking about on the forecast builder side of things here. For the updates here that we've done with this recent release, I'm not going to dwell too much into this since we covered a lot of this last week on the forecast builder webinar, but I will quickly run through these. First, the biggest thing that we did was move the forecast builder program out of the CRGFE tools package on the software collaboration portal into its own project, since it gains steam outside of Central Region. So that I figure, since it's now a bigger thing, better get it out. Next up, we did some blow on snow tool updates that were mentioned in a February webinar, but we've had some off and on issues here with some of the no risk data. So we're going to get that fixed in the next National SmartNet release. Obviously, it's the blow and snow season's coming to an end, so that'll be basically available next winter. New probability severe tool has been implemented, which incorporates SBC convective outlooks. We've got forecast ability now to utilize the time ranges in the GFE Grid Manager. That was a request from quite a few different offices expanded different regions, so that the way that the time selection in the forecast builder GUI matches what you see in GFE. Then the ability to incorporate this edit retention add-on, Jeremy mentioned about it earlier. If that's installed, again, this is something that we've been evaluating amongst the team here. All signs are looking like we'll get this out to everybody, but we are still kind of sending feedback to the developer up in Missoula on things that we need to have adjusted. A couple of digital aviation services additions, which include the creation of freeze and fog, and then also add in the ceiling height and visibility to elements that get published. And talking about the smoke and haze earlier in the digital aviation services section, I added code for that like back in September, but I see that the missed section for that, it actually pops up as an option to populate using those within the forecast builder GUI. So in the next tech note, that will be corrected. So code's already there, just needs a slight adjustment. And finally, all those updates with the model certainty tool. All right, and lastly, to talk before I jump on the MBM discussion, I wanted to mention in terms of development, the big things we're working on here is going to be the GUI and redoing that and fire weather, just so you're aware of that. On to NBM stuff. I know there's been questions about, hey, when are we moving to the NBM? Well, as the Central Region Grid Methodology team went through and did a thorough analysis, the verification looked great. There's been a lot of good things we've seen. Some of the elements. The problem, there's been some issues here and there, and one of them, especially, is with wind. Often we would see strange wind artifacts. They're not nearly as prevalent in super blend, and that's just because the algorithm that's in the NBM, and they were fairly common in days 4 through 7. I think they could have resulted in some really odd wave production on the Great Lakes had they been just left alone. So far, what we've seen is it seems to be improved in version 3.1, and that's just from a function, I think, of a lot more model guidance in there. Nevertheless, the Central Region Grid Methodology team is developing a verification approach to confirm this, and that's going to be included in part of the next tech order. A lot of that work's like almost finished up. Jerry's been a big part of that, and so give him kudos to that. And then the plan here still, again, remains to switch over to the NBM. In summary here, it's looking more likely once version 3.1 is in place, and AWEBs can handle version 3.1. Jerry and myself are working through some issues with 3.1 and AWEBs, and we're trying to get those resolved so that nothing breaks. And version 3.1 right now is scheduled to go operational around August 7th, just for your information. And with that, that will conclude this webinar in terms of our information to pass along. We want to leave up here some questions, feedback areas that you can either go through NWS chat, the VLab site for Forecast Builder, which note there is likely to change, and then obviously there's that Forecast Builder email down at the bottom for any Forecast Builder type related questions. All right, pass it back to you, Chuck, there for opening up for questions.
Yeah, let's open up for questions. Thanks, Andy.
And Chuck,
I would add, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. This is Brian Hirsch. I'm looking for hands raised, and I'm not seeing any right now from the attendees. If you have a question, we can unmute you. Please go ahead and enter your question into the chat. Thank you, and I'll let Andy go.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, if you'd like, you can also put it in the chat pane, in that chat window.
I'm not seeing any questions at this time. Is there anything that would anybody have any questions regarding Forecast Builder and DAS? All right, Chuck and Andy, I don't have any questions showing up at this time.
All right, well, thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody, for attending this call. It has been recorded, so it can be viewed later. And any questions, just pass them our way, either directly to one of the members of the team or any of the other means we've directed you toward on this slide here. So I do appreciate everybody's time, and thanks for listening.